Hello, everyone. My name is 𝘞𝘪𝘊𝘪𝘐𝑚𝑜𝘠𝑚. I'm a curator here at Singapore Art Museum. Welcome to our program, Human-Machine Relationships. It is being staged as part of the SAM exhibition entitled Wikicliki, Collecting Habits on an Earth Filled with Smartphones, which is currently on view until July 11th at the National Gallery, Singapore. So the exhibition features a range of artistic approaches to the idea of collecting, whether that's the wiki as a database form, geographic surveying, urban flânerie, or sonic sampling and remixing. So it's my hope that the program today will bring to life some of the ideas in the exhibition, especially around how we relate to machines and data. And before I hand the floor over, let me introduce our guest today who will be in conversation. Our first speaker is Maya Indira Ganesh. Maya is a tech researcher and writer who's published on a real wide range of topics, from affective computing to feminism and technology to big data and discrimination. Her doctoral research investigates how computational techniques and cultural narratives together are shaping the future of machine autonomy and the changing role of humans in all of this. Maya also brings extensive experience working at the intersection of human rights, gender, and technology across academia and the nonprofit sector. So it's a real pleasure today to welcome you, Maya, even if virtually for now, to SAM. We hope you'll be able to visit in the future. And in conversation with Maya today is Bani haykal. Bani is an artist and musician whose recent projects have addressed human-machine intimacies through various forms of interfacing and interaction. And that's manifested in installations, poetry, and performance. And his capacity as a collaborating soloist, Bani has participated in many international festivals, including Mecca, Media Art Kitchen, Liquid Architecture, Singapore International Festival of the Arts, among many others. So Bani and I have been working together over the past several months on staging his work, 𝘊𝘍𝘍𝘐 𝘠𝘪𝑗𝑐, as part of the Wikicliki exhibition. And it's personally very exciting to see the bigger picture of your research today. So I'm going to hand it over to both of you, Bani and Maya. Please take it away.
Hello.
Hi, Bani. And thank you so much for this invitation to you and to Kenji and the Singapore Art Museum. Singapore is a city that I really love visiting, and I have good friends there. So I'm sorry that I can't be there, and I really wish I was. But anyway, this is where we are now and what we have. So yeah.
Yeah, it's good to be here as well. Thank you, Kenji, and thank you, Maya. For sort of like accepting the invitation as well. It's a real honor to be sharing this time and space with you as well. I've been following your work a fair bit as well, and there are a lot of things that you write, that you do, that very much resonates with me, or they are provocative, and they also sort of like trigger a lot of questions, which sort of like got me thinking about a lot of different strands or threads in my personal practice. And I am very grateful for all that you've done, and to be able to share this particularly, I feel extremely honored and privileged as well. So I guess we've sort of like had a brief chat prior to this, and I would like for for this time to be used to sort of like understand your work a bit more, and maybe sort of like see where our points sort of like entwine with one another, and at the same time how we could sort of like find ways to problematize some of these positions or ideas. And yeah, maybe I think I'd let you have you start this session, and we'll see where that takes us.
Okay, thank you so much. No, it is really nice to be talking with you today. I know that we've known each other online and followed each other, and I'm very honored and and touched that you'd want to engage with my work and give me the opportunity to also sort of flesh out some of these ideas, because it's one thing to, I think, sit and write something, and you write on your own, and you think about things a lot, and there aren't a lot of opportunities to say, well, this is what I meant, or there aren't a lot of opportunities to unpack those things. They just go out into the world. And so it is nice to revisit some older work, but also just sort of mark your own distance in time. And does that idea still hold? Do I still feel that way? And I think one of the things we don't often have on the internet is this opportunity to actually clarify what we mean by something. And yeah, because everybody reads things in different ways. And that's probably a good sort of opening to what I want to talk about today. As you said, I know that we had this conversation about intimacy and machines, and I've written about this in different ways in the past. But I think that today, maybe I'm going to do something or try something slightly different, and let's see where it takes us. Because I was also thinking that, you know a lot of my work from before, and what is something new that I could put out there and see if it sort of connects. And if it absolutely doesn't and it falls flat, then we'll just talk about the old stuff and see where it goes. So as you said, as you were sharing before, pieces of your work, and I don't want to preempt what you're going to say, but I think what I want to talk about today is a little bit speculative and draws on the work of a couple of other people who I wouldn't usually look at. And primarily I'm thinking about the literary critic, the American literary critic, Xian Ingai. So her work has been really interesting for me to think about what I'm going to talk about today. So the question you'd asked me was, why is intimacy important now? What kinds of intimacies do we have with machines? And I wanted to clarify that right now, when I'm thinking about the machine, I'm actually thinking about the digital, because it can mean so many different things. But I want to talk about digital culture today, which brings in so many different ideas of intimacies and merging and hybridity, and not just in the sense of robotics or AI, which I have been writing about a lot and we have been thinking about a lot. So and just to clarify that when I say AI, I'm usually referring to configurations of technologies that sense and perceive the world, if not always make sense of the world. So that's the context or sort of register in which I'm thinking about the machine. But also in relation to this question about intimacy, it's not just about intimacy with the machine, but I want to think about how intimacies are changing or morphing or evolving in relationship with machines. So I think our idea of intimacy itself is perhaps changing. And that's something that I find quite curious and interesting. So how this started was thinking about writing about AI, but also I used to write a lot about violence. A lot of my work has been in feminist spaces, in movements and organizations, sort of thinking about violence in a very specific and narrow way of things like offline violence, things like rape, but also things like online harassment, and thinking about how do these things happen, and how do we reclaim bodily integrity, but and hold people to account, and basically stop and prevent violence, raise awareness about it. And I think Me Too has been a very interesting moment for all of us to sort of think about the limits of our body, of language, of the digital space, and more sort of this condition of the digital itself, where we find ourselves not quite knowing our place and thinking we know what things mean, but not actually knowing what things mean. And I think I'm referring not to violence here, but the fact of how we address each other, and the fact that we can make claims on the internet. And I think we still have a very conflicted relationship with the internet, which Me Too has brought to the fore, amongst many other things of just like, sort of historic and perpetual violence and privilege and the abuse of power. But the other thing also is I've been thinking more recently about what does a feminist politics of risk mean? And that's a little bit different from talking about violence and protecting yourself from violence, because to go back to some, sort of ancient history in my own work, one of the first studies I did about internet technologies, and this is thanks to our common friend, Jack, in KL, that first project was from 2008, and it was about how women in Bombay experience the internet. And it was called Negotiating Intimacy and Harm. It's kind of interesting that the word intimacy was in that one as well. I didn't realize it till just now. Negotiating Intimacy and Harm, and women were talking about how the internet is a place of dangers, but it's not a dangerous place. And I found that distinction sort of interesting, and it's something that has stayed with me a very long time when we think about our spaces online and what we're trying to do. And while it is really difficult and important to call out things like violence, I'm also really curious about what risk means and risk-taking means. And it's something that I wonder if it's because of the kind of identities and the way we inhabit space on the internet that we take different kinds of risks, not just in relating to people and talking to people, but also in how we put ourselves out there and the way that we even risk our identities in the digital in different ways. So that's one set of things that I've been thinking about. The other relates to, the piece that I wrote for the Gwangju Biennale's online publication, and now it's offline as well, called Stronger Than Bone, and this is a feminisms reader. I believe the piece is available online. I'm sure we can link to it. And I think in that one, what I was trying to do was talk about the excitements, but also the disappointments, and mostly the disappointments of living an intimate online life in a specifically gendered and sexualized body, and trying to negotiate some of these dangers, negotiate a lack of trust. We know that the internet is a place of, people do terrible things, to each other on and via the internet. So the piece for the Gwangju Biennale, Between Flesh, was about, negotiating disappointment and excitement, but also through that, then thinking about, well, who am I and how do I inhabit this body in a moment when we're supposed to know ourselves and be really clear about our identities and what we want, all of these things that are very important in a capitalist neoliberal world to sort of getting ahead and being ahead. What does it mean to sort of not be entirely sure? Which brings me to saying that I really want to emphasize today more sort of ugly feelings, as 𝘰𝘭𝘂𝘭𝘬 Ganesh puts it. This is the name of a book that she brought out, well, actually now 2005, I think. And it's a work of literary criticism and cultural criticism. It's not something I would usually pick up and read, but I found parts of it really interesting, even though it's very much about and in the American context and a lot of American cultural references. But what I found really interesting in this work is when she talks about ugly feelings and negative affect. So she talks about things like paranoia and envy, anxiety, irritation. And this is, and the thing is, we don't often talk about these feelings. We tend to talk about, like, the 7 deadly sins, these big emotions, fear, pride, anger. And I found that this sort of focus on negative affect is a really interesting thing in the context of the digital, because when you think about it, intimacy is not just about, your inner thoughts and your experience with yourself, but it's about also being able to share aspects of yourself that are not the best. It's the psychic version of what you look like when you wake up first thing in the morning. Your not so cool self, your sort of slightly crabby, negative, envious, insecure self. And this is also the self that you show to the people around you when you wake up first thing in the morning. And for someone to be able to see that in you is an act of great intimacy. And which is why I think the internet and the digital is such a great space, because it has become so much of our really intimate spaces where it is sometimes the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning. So in a way, the internet sees you as that kind of person. And we have found these very artful ways of putting ourselves out there and, bringing our negative affects out into the internet in a host of very interesting ways, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But to go back to 𝘰𝑎𝑛𝑖𝑛𝑔𝑎𝑖, who is my thinking today, one of the things she writes about in her introduction is that how difficult and important it is to talk about the aesthetic and the political together, and which is why, you know, she's making an argument for why we must talk about some of these feelings, because I think this is where art and aesthetics also come in. And I think it's very fitting that we would talk about it at a museum and in a cultural space, because I think these are the spaces where we often talk about powerlessness. And I think negative affects and feelings make us feel powerless. And she says that the art world is also one of those very unique places and uniquely placed to talk about powerlessness, because sometimes it can feel very powerless to be in an artistic space, primarily because of the relationship to capital. This is what Ngai is saying, but I suppose we all know this. And the other reason that I want to talk about intimacy in the sense of affect, but also some of these negative affects, is because of this domain of affective computing, which is supposed to be very profitable and lucrative. And I really don't think that it's very good or robust. And I think a lot of people have been able to call this out with good scientific information and writing. But I think there is a history, of course, to this whole field, chiefly in places like MIT and coming out through robotics. And it's also something that I've written about, I'm sure we'll talk about. But what's happened now is I think the applications of these technologies as, well, now mostly surveillance and things like worker surveillance or surveilling, you know, people in driverless cars to make sure that they're not losing attention. And, you know, this is for future liability. So if the semi-driverless car gets into an accident, then we can easily blame the human, because we know we have surveillance evidence of, you know, somebody getting sleepy or somebody being distracted. And this is the kind of thing that affective computing can pick up. So while all of this industry is exploding around affective computing and people think it's, you know, some great thing, I think also that it is being discredited because, you know, it's so hard even for us to know what the other person means. If you had to translate these details of what we mean and how we feel and what our body postures mean, you know, interpreting each other non-verbally, even verbally, and that too at a distance is really hard. So there's a lot of hubris in at the heart of things like affective computing. Maybe some of the older work was kind of interesting and, you know, sort of humans relating to very rudimentary robots, I think, but I think affective computing says much more about human emotions and the role of culture in that, rather than can we translate these things to machines, or how well do machines understand that. So, and I think that negative affects in our relationship to technology are also difficult to name. They're hard to bear. They're difficult to capture and categorize. And I wonder if we might, I don't know, resist some kind of categorization. I don't want to valorize kind of not understanding each other, but I think it is really hard and tricky to try and translate what we mean into technologies that are supposed to sense and perceive, and for the reasons that I've just been mentioning about the field of emotions and affect being so deeply cultural and specific, and because we barely understand each other as humans anyway. So I just want to maybe move towards putting out some, you know, I just made a list of negative, ugly affects and that, you know, we experience every day in the digital, and maybe that can be the starting point for our conversation. So these are, of course, extremely personal and come from my experience, but it's more an invitation also for others to think about their own experiences of ugly feelings and negative affects through the digital. So, okay, so one, your bestie always has the best reaction GIFs, the one that is pitch perfect and better, yet the one that you have never actually seen. So there's something really nice about getting the right GIF at the right time. Then there's being delighted and being charmed, which on the internet is a very unique kind of thing and takes on different sorts of registers. So recently I found that my mother sent me a meme, and it's a meme about Zoom, and I'm going to show it to you right now. What's interesting about it is I saw this meme early in 2020 when the pandemic lockdown really started. And my mother sent it to me 2 days ago. And it got me thinking, that's so interesting that my mother has got this meme now and found it. And I don't think of her as much of an internet digital culture person. And this is the meme that you've seen it, everyone's seen it. I'm just going to share my screen. It's the one which says, virtual meetings are basically modern seances. Elizabeth, are you here? Make a sound if you can hear us. Is anyone else with you? We can't see you. Can you hear us? And of course, it's like a seance, and it's exactly how Zoom works because of terrible infrastructure, just people not knowing how Zoom works. So I found it very interesting when my mother sent me this meme, because it was making me think about then the sort of latencies of memes traveling around the internet, and what does it say about a community or a group that you're part of. You think something is only known in your group, but when it sort of jumps, this meme jumps to another group that you don't have any connection with, and it comes back to you, then you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I refer to that as a very unique kind of internet delight and charm. Another kind of internet affect, digital affect, is my friend George 2 days ago sent me a screenshot of how she said she made the Instagram algorithm bend towards her by showing her all the cats in the world that she wanted to, or particular kinds of cats. And I thought that was really interesting, and it's true. We either have this feeling of being outraged by algorithmic tracking, not just because it's tracking us, which in itself is horrible, but focusing on negative and ugly affects, outrage at the terrible choices. And it's like, how do you not know me? And we say this to people that we know and love as well. Is this what you think I am? Do you think I need something for my teeth? Like, why am I being shown all of these ads about, improving my smile? Or do you think that's what my style is? Oh my God, why am I being shown ads for these very frumpy clothes? Like, that's not me. So, there's this feeling of being not understood and being outraged at what you're being shown. And then there's the other end where you feel you have achieved some kind of mastery by responding to the algorithm. And now, as George feels, it is bending towards her and, showing her all the cats that she wants, and very particular kinds of cats. And then the other feeling that we have quite often in relation to algorithms is this idea of, where did the outrage go? When something happens online, something that's important to you, that's important in the world, in your world, it's all over your timeline, it's all over your feed, it's really important social issue or cultural issue, something has happened in the world, and everyone is talking about it, and it's really important. And then there's a moment when the attention drops and nobody's talking about it anymore. And this is a moment when I should shout out to Patricia Lockwood's new book that everyone's been going on about and saying is amazing. It's called Why Is No One Talking About This Anymore? Or Why Is No One Talking About It? I really have to read it now that I'm, kind of at the end of the PhD. I can actually sort of read other books for joy and pleasure. And it's this idea of like, why is no one talking about it? Where did the outrage go? Why did they stop talking about it? And I think there's if you look inside yourself, there's a very specific feeling you have of feeling terrible about the world, and nobody cares because it's not online anymore. You actually don't know what people are doing anywhere, but it's like a child's game of peekaboo. When you play peekaboo with a child and you go like this, the child is so egocentric at that stage when they can still be excited by games like peekaboo. The game is exciting for a child because at that point in your life, you are so egocentric. You think that only what you perceive is the whole world. You cannot perceive any other reality. So when someone goes like this and then reopens, you think they've disappeared, and then they've reappeared, and it's absolutely magical. And this is sort of a little bit like that, when you're like, why is no one talking about this? Just because I can't see this, why isn't it there? The other is, of course, the subtweet. I think much can be said about the subtweet. And it is a way of transforming your sarcasm, anger, or criticism into language. And it's a bit like hissing on the internet, and which is actually a very fantastic thing to be able to do through language. To do like the well-placed, well-crafted subtweet, I think is wonderful. Then there's the low-grade irritation that comes from waiting for a response from anybody, you know, when you can track that somebody has not paid attention to your email or your tweet, but yet you know they're on the internet. So what are they doing? You know, why aren't they responding to you? Then, of course, there's doom scrolling, which everybody knows now and knows this word now. And what I think is interesting about doom scrolling is that it's actually boredom. This is mixture of outrage and boredom together, and you're just sort of going on and on. There's the fear of being addicted. At least I have this, but very specifically to TikTok. TikTok is fantastic. And I don't have TikTok on my phone because I know I will just love it too much. But what is more important than that is having friends who are so good at curating TikTok that they will send you TikToks now and then, so you don't have to do the work of being addicted. And I think there's no greater internet, no greater aspect of the digital and digital friendship with people who can do that. The other is the sadness of sarcasm that does not get conveyed, you know, the sound of a balloon deflating. And this is like the ultimate thing. The internet does not get humor. The internet does not get sarcasm. So this makes me think about a project from MIT Media Lab. I don't know how well the project is doing now, but it's called 𝘸𝘪𝘵𝘩. You can look it up. And it's a project to help computers understand what we mean in our use of emoji. And there's something kind of cussed and annoying about wanting a computer to understand that, because there's something so unique to emoji language and placement and time and choice across culture and different generations that I don't know, I think it's like translation. It is a form of translation. So there's emoji, then there is and then, of course, there's memes itself and the kind of complex in-group languages that we have on the internet, where knowledge of a particular incident, knowing what the meme structure is, knowing how to put the meme together, putting it out in the world, watching it fall flat or blow up, you know. I should shout out to this wonderful new group called the Meme Studies Research Network, which I really wish I was, you know, more involved with, and I, you know, been to some of their events. I think it's great. I think that there's so much to be said for memes. And then, well, things like envy and jealousy, I think are very interesting sort of intimate, negative, ugly affects that we have. I know people who just don't go on Instagram because it upsets them too much to see other people's wonderful lives. And I think, I don't know, that makes me feel a bit sad. But I know that the reason I'm on Instagram is because the last thing I really want to say about this is privacy and being able to rethink privacy in different ways and have it mean different things. So for me, Instagram is a very, very tightly curated space where I don't want a lot of followers. I actually only want to talk to 50 of my friends pretty much every day. So I post a lot of Instagram stories and I'm literally talking to my friends, and I'm hoping that they see it. Not all of them respond to me, but it's like I talk in a way that I know they will get, that I'm being sarcastic, or I'm not being sarcastic, or I'm really reaching out for help, or I really find something funny. So I feel that there's all of these, it's not just about these monolithic ideas of me and the internet or you and the machine, but I think that we are in these sort of intimate loops that eventually have so much to do with time and waiting, but they also eventually are these very long loops of self-reflection in a way. I think the ultimate intimacy is only really just being friends with yourself. And I don't know, I think that I'm happy to find spaces on the internet which allow me to do that. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Woo. All right. No, thank you so much. There's so much for me to sort of like thread through, particularly the examples that you gave and talking about this frame of effective computing as well. Now I'm sort of like rethinking whether I should even share my slides at this point in time.
No, don't be silly. Go for it. Go for it. Please do share your slides now.
Yeah, no, largely also because they're sort of like meant to signpost like means of engaging into a conversation. I'll go through them nevertheless, but I feel like there's actually a lot more in what you just shared earlier on that I'd like to touch on as well. So maybe I'll just very briefly go through this.
Please.
So I call this slide because it's not exactly a presentation of my work in that sense, but it's just sort of like existing threads which are relatively open at this point in time, and if not very open. I'm not sure where they might go towards and how they would sort of like touch or sort of like wrap itself in some of the positions and points that you've shared earlier on. But I think there might be ways for us to do that, and hopefully it's not too off tangent. But yeah, puzzle pieces for an incomplete conversation. I think this is pretty much all of my life when I sort of like start getting in touch back with friends. This is not just specific to us being in lockdown in any way. I generally, yeah, I info dump on friends like quite a fair bit with all these various fragments of things that I'm thinking about, so on and so forth. So these are sort of like threads based off, things that I know of your work and how we could sort of like find resonance. And the first one is on intimacy. As I've shared before, and in a separate artist talk that Kenji and I would have, intimacy is a fairly central theme that appears in my work, largely because it comes from that constant interfacing with the machine and with also the digital as well, right? I'm not sure about you, but I kind of grew up in that text-based chat world, through IRC, MSN Messenger, so on and so forth. Like a lot of my interactions with people outside my immediate circle of friends has always been through text. And one of the objects that I think about a lot is actually the keyboard itself. That sort of like one physical surface that you are actually touching in order to communicate or in order to convey and express, so on and so forth. So in many ways, I think about the keyboard as one of our most intimate partners. That it is the keyboard knows our most intimate secrets, our passwords, what we share to our friends, lovers, so on and so forth. It is the one in a sense, interface that gets you into the digital that you feel, that you sense the most. But, in some of the, in what you've covered on intimacy, particularly, and just to go back very quickly on to the text that you wrote for the 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐 Biennale, this part of it was something that I've been sitting on quite a fair bit, thinking about this particular sentence where you wrote, "I imagine desire quarantined inside a window so small and highly encrypted that both she and this guy have to decode and discover each other anew every time asynchronously. Steel without, flesh within." Now, I know that in this particular piece, it was situated in this idea of the fembot, right? And I think your friend in that text you wrote was rejecting, saying that I am not a fembot. But what does it also mean to be behind these screens? Like, if I were to think of our relation through our screens and onto the digital platform, this for me felt like where we all are, how we're all sort of like in this particular space, which is, and the word highly encrypted sort of like got me thinking or gestures towards this idea of end-to-end encryption. Like, it is a safe sort of like space between two parties that sort of like sharing this information and what that means. And so this idea of intimacy and also this frame of encryption, I guess, is something that has been central in what I've been thinking about, what it means for computers to encrypt us and what it means for only two bodies to have that piece of information together. And I guess like this is where intimacy for me was exciting to sort of like think about further, because it is not just about a sense of closeness anymore. And in the talk that I have with Kenji also, I dive a little bit more into this, but I think very quickly, I just wanted to, pepper this session that we have on what intimacy in Malay sort of like means, right? And I speak about this idea of 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐 a fair bit. 𝘞𝘪𝘬 as is used in one way is to talk about closeness, joyousness, but it is also primarily used in cooking as well. What it means to mix different ingredients together to create a new body, a new consistency. So it's like thinking about process of cooking as a potential metaphor for hybridization. The process of blending, absorbing, becoming, but also a process of making, to call into existence, right? And maybe as you say, the digital, through all these different sort of like complex categories, emotions, affects that sort of like come together, we are ultimately becoming something else. I mean, it's still primarily coming from two or multiple sources, but there is an enmeshing of something that is happening here. And I think, memes, as you call it, is quite the epitome of all this, right? Like memes are constantly being built upon, as you mentioned, the structure of a meme is always consistently being shaped. And there are also multiple characters. So the moment these characters appear, you don't need pretext of what it is you're about to read if you're already part of this hybrid being or entity that we are through this digital space. The next one that I just wanted to touch on was on language or personal languages. And I think memes, is that perfect encapsulation again. You can sort of like, and I know people who just have conversations utilizing just memes, right? Your chat logs are just memes after memes after memes. And I think that in itself is just extremely dynamic, because you don't have to use these typical, sort of like somatic replies. Yes, I'm okay. I will see you there, so on and so forth. It's a lot more rich, I feel, through these images and just what a single character or symbol actually means or represents. And going back again, the one thing which I go back upon in the text of yours is another line, another quote that I really like, where you say, the cyborg, on the other hand, is the beloved, complicated, ugly step sibling that calls out all the problematic dualisms at the heart of the modernist technology project: male, female, nature, culture, public, private, animal, machine, master, slave. And I think the focus here in thinking about, language and personal language is, again, going back into this cyborg, right? I think cyborg has sort of like multiple sort of like meanings and, frames based on who you speak to and what people sort of like hope to conjure when we think about the cyborg. So the cyborg for me at this point in time, I think, is that space where it is still being contested. What does it mean to become a cyborg? And I think in your previous work, you also talk about the almost cyborg, and that's I guess sort of like a question that I've been meaning to ask as well. But hopefully, I would hope to tie it back in with what you just shared earlier on. And this is just like an image, thinking about, bridging this idea of personal languages and also intimacy, about what it means to sort of like create a whole new language where you interface with your personal machines. Like at this point in time, your keyboard is sort of like specific to you, but also how do computers then have like a sort of personal relationship with you? What it means to have a computer that only understands you, and refusing for anyone else to understand that body unless there's an established, permission or desire to connect, for that matter. What is that personal space that we have with our personal machines? I guess that's sort of like something that I'm thinking about in terms of what it means to be a cyborg. And I guess lastly, something that we were sort of like speaking about earlier on, and which goes back into this idea of into what you shared earlier on about Sian Ngai's work on negative affects as well. Spirits, right? The bits of us that's inside our digital spaces or inside our machines itself. You know, I always bring this analogy up, or this belief that if you took a photo of someone, you're sort of like capturing the spirit or the soul of a person into the camera, into the machine. And actually it goes into a similar belief with tape recorders as well, and recording the voice into a machine. And so for me, you know, when we speak about negative effects as well, it is something, it is useful to think about what actually gets trapped inside and what actually manifests inside the machine, or what actually manifests on the digital sphere, what it resonates across, and how people sort of like, or how other sort of like spirits respond to that, and what it actually spawns, or what it actually sort of like perpetuates as well. The images that I'm sort of like sharing next with regards to spirits actually has a lot to do with talismans, or what it means to create, you know, these azimats, or these talismans, charms, to summon, you know, very specific spells, and some of them even spirits as well, to either protect, to safeguard, to promote prosperity, for instance. Like, these are sort of like different different objects, different spells that are sort of like utilized as a means of enacting a kind of, or to engage towards a particular cause that you like, right? And there is always someone who is sitting, the medium, or the person that's actually creating this. As the user, you don't exactly know what this means, but it's already been encrypted in this particular text, in this particular image. And so it really, for me, this was sort of like the impetus to thinking about what it means to also safeguard the spirits inside these machines, what it means for, you know, not to ensure that, you know, some of these things do not get taken out of context, do not get misrepresented, so on and so forth. I think it's just sort of like a way that I'm thinking about information or spirits that sort of like sitting in the digital spaces, and methods or approaches we could take in order to ensure that there is a certain protection that is enacted upon them. So, like, again, these images are just extremely exciting for me, because as someone who does not do this, I see them in a completely different way, but there is a space that it inhabits between the medium, the person who creates it, and sort of like the greater forces around it, and what it actually sort of like does. So that's sort of like the three sort of like disparate, you know, elements that I was thinking of sharing about, you know, and some of the immediate questions about what it means to be intimate with, I guess right now it's not just about machines, but what it means to be intimate with digital selves, or that digital space as well. So maybe the first question that I'm thinking about, you know, I mean, if we go back into this, into sort of like some of the first few things that you mentioned, maybe a question is, how do you see this notion of intimacy itself changing in the future? I mean, at this point in time, we're sort of like seeing, you know, the use of images, symbols, memes as, you know, means of communicating with one another. But if you were to sort of like go down the speculative front, how much, you know, what do you think's on that horizon at this point in time?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that it's the speed and the dynamism and the interactivity, which has kind of always been there with the internet. I mean, I think that we have always used about, you know, visual media to communicate things in highly encrypted ways. You know, these things are very situated. And of course, there's stories to all of our visual cultures being extremely just about a particular time and place. But I think right now there's the work, and, you know, I sort of understand encryption as part of this. It is work to encrypt and it is work to decrypt. And that sort of proof of doing that, well, that's the basis of blockchain, but we won't go into that. But this work of encrypting and decrypting meaning is what I think is, you know, what the intimacy actually is. And that statement that you pulled out is about being in the little box. At one level, it was about, yes, we need sometimes these spaces which are just very much about two people, but knowing what you meant when something was said or something was taken, and then what it means when it reaches the other side. I think that's always a challenge and a risk, but that's also the work of intimacy, of understanding what did you really mean. And there's something about the speed with which we're supposed to do things now, where there's no space for clarification. And I think that space for clarification is really important, but doing the work to think about that person and what they could have meant. And I think, and the richness, as I like the way you talked about kind of memes. I think many of us have these relationships with some people where your chat log is just basically GIFs and memes. And it's a way of also, I think, when people are not comfortable talking with words, I think there's many people, many of us, I'm somebody who loves words. So for me, I write a lot of things, but I also find a lot of space in not needing to articulate everything all the time, especially since I've just written 241 pages and 73,000 words. The keyboard, yes, definitely is that space of intimacy for me, but it's also like, oh my God, don't make me touch it anymore. It's like, it's terrible. I've actually started sending voice notes to all my friends, because voice is also really intimate, but it's just so much easier to just kind of record and send things, and very long detailed notes as well sometimes. So I think that, bringing together, I mean, this idea of intimacy changing is about these different layers of work that you have to do. And sometimes it's pleasurable work, it's nice work, it's fun work. Sometimes it's annoying, but for the most part, I think intimacy is about saying, yes, I will do this work because I am intimate with you, so it is, or with something, with another person, with a group, with an idea or whatever. So yeah, I'm aware that our time is also running out. So I want to sort of have you, sort of raise more things of us to talk about more things and not me to just dominate. But yeah, I'll stop there.
No, that's fine. That's great. Yeah. Ooh. No, so, like, right now I'm trying to think about the number of sort of like social media platforms that we inhabit, right? Both of us that we're sort of like on. I'm personally only on Twitter most of the time. The other parts of it, it's not exactly social media spaces, but SoundCloud, Bandcamp. So they're sort of like mostly music related kind of platforms. I don't exactly inhabit any other spaces. And I'm just curious, you mentioned about Instagram earlier on, and I know that you also maintain a Twitter account, but what are your sort of like, what are the ways that you, or how do you sort of like differentiate the ways that you navigate through these different online spaces? And what are the sort of like different degrees of intimacy that you have in these different circles and on these different spaces? And are there any overlaps as well?
Yeah, no, good question. I think this is not so much a matter of intimacy, but more a matter of just kind of digital management and management of your space and privacy, which takes on so many different meanings. So actually my partner used to have and we met on Twitter, has a very nice way of describing the differences between Facebook and Twitter. And this is back in the day when people used to actually be on Facebook, where he says, Facebook is all the people that you know, Twitter is all the people you want to know. And this is like a quote this is an observation that's at least 10 years old, if not more. And at that time, I remember thinking, oh yes, that's so true, because Facebook was that place where your aunties and your high school friends or frenemies were, and you just had to sort of be there and show up. And I've been locked out of my Facebook account for over a year now, and I really don't care. Like, it doesn't matter. I never used to go there anyway, except for like certain friends' birthdays and whatever, and people having babies and getting divorced, and you didn't know about what was happening. So that was the point of Facebook. Now I haven't been there, but it's true that more than 10 years ago, I think I got onto Twitter in 2008. Because it was text-based, it was language-based, a lot of it was very dynamic and was about interesting people and conversations and everything. Of course, it's not that now. What's changed actually for me now is I know that Twitter is a very curated space for me. I'm very intentional about what I put out there, the voice that I maintain there. I know academics love Twitter, and I actually get a lot of information, like somebody published something, and I know there's a lot of, I like kind of watching the play of what's going on. Plus it's a news source, so, and you know that, oh, Singapore Art Museum is having an event, so it's kind of like that. For me, though I know that there are some people for whom they post extremely personal things there. And it's going back to that egocentric child where you think everybody uses the internet the way you use the internet. And that's not true. That's not true at all. And it bears repeating because we all think that, well, isn't that how you do it? When you watch somebody else use their computer, you're like, oh, is that how you, I don't know, attach a file or share this or use that program or whatever? It's actually a very, very intimate thing to have someone look over your shoulder, see how you're using your computer and be like, oh, that's how they do it, or to judge them for how they're doing it. So yeah, so Twitter is a very curated space for me, very intentional. Because I've been writing my dissertation, I have just not looked at Twitter for I would say about more than 2 weeks now. I can't bear it. Instagram has over the last few years, I also love visuals and images. So it's like a really great sort of pinboard for pinning stuff that you want and getting inspiration. But I keep my two worlds separate, and Instagram is mostly my friends. And everybody that's part of my Instagram account is somebody that I've met in Meetspace. And if I haven't met them in Meetspace, then it's someone I've had a long enough conversation and interaction with. Like I would become Instagram friends with you, for example. I don't know if I put you on my private friends list yet, but you know what I mean? It's like, so yeah, and I post a lot of Instagram stories. So it's very much about, I think, me being honest about the voice that I have and what I'm saying and what I'm feeling. And I like taking photographs. Who doesn't like taking photographs these days, right? Everyone thinks they can be a great photographer with an iPhone. So I like to take photographs and put them online, and that's about it. I am highly aware of the capture, this thing about capturing our souls. I love that you brought that up because, when I was growing up, I heard this, but heard it from the perspective of white colonial people saying, oh, these natives, they have this weird belief that if you take a photograph, you capture somebody's soul and it gets taken away. Ha ha ha, isn't that so backwards? And I remember hearing that and thinking, but isn't the whole point of photography, like in a lot of Western photography art and things like this, that to capture the moment or to really capture the feeling? What is that? You are capturing their souls in a way. The great photographer is there at that so-called decisive moment, and you are actually capturing something so specific. So I'm very conscious of when we say the capture of data privacy and all of these things. So yeah, I am very conscious of capture, and so I think about that a lot on Instagram, because I know this is one nasty data engine that's God knows what they're doing with all of that stuff. But I think that it's it's important to just kind of recognize and mention that these platforms are so heavily captured, and which is why the ugly affects or the ugly feelings for me are like a weird kind of obfuscation, in a way that they are so difficult to decrypt. It may be very easy to encrypt, but they are so difficult to decrypt. And I want them to remain difficult spaces to engage with, so that they do become a layer of obfuscation and things don't mean what they actually mean, So yeah, that's how I feel about social media.
Oh, absolutely. Like, going back to this idea of capturing that moment, I the first point, I think, I'm thinking about how I remember reading this somewhere, coming across this text somewhere where, it stemmed from this idea that, when sort of like the colonial masters comes over with a camera, they are often asking for people to pose in a particular way. So what is this idea of, posing for the camera? What exactly is being captured, or what exactly is being, number one, curated, shaped, and also defined in that moment? So it's almost as if you do not have control over what it is that is being captured or that's being taken. So that's sort of like one trajectory in how this idea of, yeah, you are sort of like relegating control of how you're being captured or how you're being framed at that point in time. The other one, of course, as I might have shared with you separately, it was interestingly enough that it didn't come from a sort of like visual culture point of view, that it actually came from sound, from oral tradition. It came from back in 2014, I believe. Was it 2014, 2013? Yeah, 2014. I did a brief research trip in Yamaguchi in the south of Japan, and I had this opportunity to speak to an archivist who was doing recordings of traditional folk songs throughout Japan. And so I just asked him, what are some of the main challenges that you encountered, because he's been doing this since the 70s. What are some of the main challenges that you've experienced back then and today? It wasn't exactly a pointed question. I generally wanted to know, what it was. It was interesting that he did not mention technology. It wasn't so much about the tools that may have caused some challenges, or that what got easier to do today, but rather people were hesitant into singing or speaking into the machine, and the fear was that if their voices were sort of like captured or recorded into this machine, that the song would no longer be sung in the future, that it would be sort of like forgotten, and disappears to don't know where, right? So I mean, at that point in time, it's like on tape. Right now, on our digital spaces, I guess one clear difference here is that a lot of it is self-captured, taking selfies or things that you're sort of like looking at, this idea of posing, or this idea of very specific intent maybe has differed. But I'm also aware of some technologies where you implement noise as a means of disrupting the visual image, so that algorithms within Instagram are unable to utilize facial recognition to sort of like determine. And I think these strategies of obfuscation, as you mentioned, are very fascinating devices or fascinating tools. But it is not also without dark sides as well. Like a tool could ultimately be utilized in a way which I don't know, like emboldens other acts of violence as well. Some information that gets completely scrambled, it looks like one thing, but it's unreadable even by the machine because of very specific implementations. So I guess I'm also thinking about what it means for tools to continuously become sophisticated and advanced, and what that also means for us being sort of like enmeshed with these tools. And I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I think that, we're seeing this with a lot of technologies now, of like, with adversarial generative networks. So what is popularly called things like deep fakes. The adversarial networks are more like the networks. GANs are what becomes deepfake technology. With every tech, and now it's with this hologram, there's some kind of hologram technology. Everything always presents that opportunity for misuse. I think that's definitely there. And I think it's always about, you can't kind of regulate it and hold it back, but I think it's about being able to call it out and say, so there's a certain literacy that you need, but you need to be able to understand it. But here's the other thing. A lot of AI technologies only get better because they are hacked and because they are spoofed. This is how they become stronger. So it's definitely in the interest of the people who make these technologies to have the rest of us engaging with the hacking and the spoofing. And there's very famous examples of putting things into visual images to throw object recognition or visual recognition or facial recognition off track. So it's like, if you put certain stickers on a road sign in a certain way, the computer vision in a driverless car will not be able to recognize it. this is really important because that can lead to all kinds of accidents. But it happens in so many other spaces where you can, it can be very positively used, but it can also be, used in very sort of malicious, negative ways. And I think that being aware of who's doing it and why, and that AI needs to keep playing games to get better and faster and stronger, is a very dark and annoying aspect of this technology, that it has to, it needs these challenges. I mean, like the whole history of AI is all about playing games and tests of intelligence. And so you keep having these so-called intelligence, you keep having these goalposts shifting with this stuff. I think you just need like kind of critical literacy. And that's why people who know how those technologies work and who can write about them, who have access to them, you need those voices in different places, just like affective computing, and saying, no, this is kind of bullshit technology and it doesn't really work. Or similarly with, these things can be used to malign influence in these ways. I think we keep needing that conversation to happen as we see a lot of development. Things get developed and then they get put out there. There's no concept of a lab where we'll keep these things separate, because actually that's the other thing about AI. The ultimate test of AI is making it in the real world. So things are constantly going to be put out and tested and in the wild, as it were. So yeah. I don't know if we've reached national break, but if you have any last thoughts or questions, please go for it, Bani.
Yeah, no, I'm making a decision here on where do we go from here as well.
There was, one thing that you did talk about was the cyborg and the almost cyborg. And I like that you said that if we can just maybe end with that, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, sure, that's fine. I was going to talk about a feature thing, but.
Sorry, a what?
No, I was touching on this idea of, sort of like features. And I think it's just sort of like a very quick thing, which I don't think we should spend too much time on, but how features on social media sort of like perpetuate certain things. Like for instance, Twitter doesn't have an edit function, right? That's like one thing that is notorious for. And I think recently I came across an article where, this idea of quote tweeting was something where I think the person regretted making that because it kind of like enables a dunk mechanism, and how that sort of like perpetuates more sort of like vitriol and hate to happen. It was just, something that, sort of like enablers or mechanisms that sort of like encourage very specific behaviors. No, but yeah, it was just something. Negative effects. But go ahead, please.
Yeah. No, just going back to the cyborg, I like how you said that, the cyborg is a contested space. And then, there was that thing that I wrote about cyborgs and almost cyborgs. And I think, I think it's worth talking about the cyborg as an imaginary, as an idea that's very situated at a certain point in time. And it's a classic in that it's still here more than 40 years, almost 40 years later. It's something that people keep wanting to clarify and discuss, but also find a lot of spaces for discovery and opportunity to unpack these ideas of, how far does the rabbit hole go if you keep sort of unpacking these differences or thinking about ways that things can come together. Eventually you come to a point, and I feel this is maybe where my thinking is, where a cyborg is not something that you be, or it's not something that you become, because it's not even like a physical thing at one level. It's a trope, it's a framework, it's a device in the sort of sense of a thought device or a thought experiment almost, where it kind of forces you to look at where you think the divisions are, and if the divisions are real, were the divisions fabricated, and by who? So the divisions between this idea of even like nature and culture, or between human and machine, if you think about it, a lot of these divisions are very artificially manufactured. So the cyborg, I think, is a way of sort of saying, are things really separate? And why are certain things put together? So this idea of the fembot, for example, as a certain kind of cyborg figure is a very basic sort of coming together of, the idea of a body and the idea of a female body, a woman's body, and a machine. And it comes together in the most basic, almost violent representation of this tireless robot that is constantly sexually available to you and is sort of thoughtless. That's the sort of fembot trope that you see in lots of movies and in sort of literature. And I always sort of try to think, what is a way to turn that inside out? And that's why I like to sort of write about or think about this fembot. And the Stepford wife is a very good sort of idea of it in sort of culture and whatever. But there are many of those sort of hollow, no ghost in the shell type of fembot ideas. And I think it's that way to keep saying, why are these separations made and what two things are brought together? So I think it's always like more like a possibility and a potential for thinking about our relationships with technology. And my sense is, I think that's what Professor Haraway meant when she sort of talked about it. And of course, people have so many things to say about why it's problematic, but yeah, that's why it's a classic. It's one of those great conversation starters.
Sure. I if I could just end off, like,
Please.
there's some brief notes, is that I think this is where, like, I found that what your contribution was and how you wrote about this, the frame of the almost cyborg, was actually useful, because it sort of like challenges Haraway's frame in many ways, particularly sort of like it actually situates it or centers the conversation that it is a constant state of flux. It is always sort of like it is ever shifting, if that's one way to put it. And I think, like, I'm not saying that it is something that I resolve at, but that is ultimately, I think, where we sort of are when it comes to navigating ourselves, and also where we are with our digital spaces. It is this constant negotiation that is happening, and how we are constantly becoming attuned with not just each other but the environment that we share. So yeah, if anything else, I just want to end off by saying that almost cyborg as a frame was probably one of the most elegant and useful sort of like concepts that I've come across. And
Thank you so much. That's very nice. That's very sweet of you to say. And I'm glad that it has resonance. You never know when you're writing or thinking something if it means anything to anyone else, but I feel reassured. And thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really nice. And I should say to Kenji and Eunice and Sean as well at the Singapore Art Museum, this has been a really nice chat. And I hope it's interesting to people who'll be watching this soon. I don't know if Kenji is going to come in and say anything more, or you want to add anything.
Yeah, Kenji.
Yep. Hi. Thank you, Maya and Bani, for so generously sharing your ideas. I feel like this points to so many topics that we can unpack, and we'll hopefully have the opportunity to pick up on some of them in the future as well. And in the meantime, I encourage anyone who's watching in, tuning in, who's interested to look up Maya's and Bani's projects, because there's so much more to see in both of their works. So, and thank you as well to the audiences at home for joining us today. And I guess just a quick reminder at the end, the exhibition Wikicliki is still on at the National Gallery, Singapore. And we do have other public programs, virtual programs for Wikicliki as well. That's artist talks and workshops. So do check out the website, Sam's website and social media for details on how to sign up. So thank you very much again, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you.